Okay, hi. So today I'm going to talk about de-influencing your reading. And I'm really going to talk about it through the lens of de-influencing my reading and how my reading has been de-influenced through time. And maybe you'll pick up some tips and tricks on how you might be able to incorporate this into your own reading. But a lot of this is going to be about honing in on your reading taste. So just to give a little bit of background, I have always been a fairly avid reader. I read a lot when I was growing up, a lot of genre fictions, a lot of fantasy, dystopians, horrors, and then went to college, stopped reading for a bit, and then in my adult years decided to get back into reading. And it took a while to get kind of suited into what my new reading tastes were. I found the bookish internet pretty quickly after that, and that became a very heavy influence on my reading. I started following a lot of the popular booktubers at the time. We're talking, I think, 2017, 2018, so a lot of book influencers who were into YA. So I started reading a lot of YA, and then I found I wasn't really loving a ton of the books that I was reading. At the same time, I was kind of like navigating through just by picking up books from my library. So that was kind of literary fiction. And then I started getting into a lot more of the literary fiction side of BookTube and kind of got away from a lot of the YA BookTube, got into the literary fiction BookTube, and still found that my track record for books that I enjoyed wasn't that great. So I guess I'll get into how I actually started de-influencing my reading, which is a little bit ironic to talk about on a channel where I, in some capacity, am attempting to influence you to pick up books that you may enjoy, but follow my train of logic. Because it's not really about being de-influenced, it's about being properly influenced. And a lot of that is going to be developing an understanding of your own reading taste. So then I think for me, what I had to do was really start to question, like, why did I like a book? So if I enjoyed something, what about it did I like? And start to actually parse those things out. Was it the plot? Was it the characters? Was it the pacing? Was it the writing? What parts of it worked for me and what parts of it didn't? And kind of develop a more nuanced understanding of my appreciation of a book that I read, aside from just that general, I liked it or I didn't, or it made me feel something, kind of parse out but what about it made me feel? And it might sound like, some people are going to be like, I just like to read to have fun. And I totally respect that. And so I'm not really advocating here for intensive reading. I'm advocating more for reflective reading, being a little bit more considerate of the book as you're reading it, of what parts of it you are and are not enjoying. This can sometimes, I think, feel like you're being very critical of a book, or you're criticizing your reading, or you're critiquing your reading. But I suggest kind of looking at it through the lens of you're just learning your own personal reading taste. So while it might feel that you're putting a critique on a book that you really enjoyed, and I think at least for me, that can sometimes downplay the experience that I had with the book and make it seem like I liked it less than I did, it really helps, at least in my experience, to identify the best books for you in the future. I think that something that will come up, and that came up for me, is that sometimes the things that I enjoyed in a book are gonna matter more or less in different books. So as an example, when I read a fantasy book, I don't need the writing to be beautiful. But I need to have intrigue somewhere. It doesn't even have to be an action-packed plot. it can be something where there's really interesting character dynamics and or there's an interesting magic system. There's something that like continues to pull my intrigue in, but the writing can be so-so. Oh, and I think that like the fantasy can just be a fantasy. Like it doesn't really have to be doing a lot of extra stuff for me to enjoy it. Whereas if I'm reading sci-fi, which for some people you might just incorporate those two together and say, I feel the same way about both sci-fi fantasy. For me, my favorite parts of science fiction are the exploration of humanity through a lens. So I really read sci-fi for the thematic content. So if there's like an action-packed sci-fi like Dark Matter or this series that I think is both sci-fi and fantasy, you could argue both ways. I'm just not going to enjoy it as much. Like something like Dune, while it might have themes, I don't know. Like the concept behind it in terms of what I come to sci-fi for doesn't really intrigue me. And then like something like a literary fiction, I'm going to expect something interesting. Like if you're going to give me the same themes, because themes are so heavy in literary fiction, if you're going to give me the same themes that really a lot of literary fiction gives, you're going to have to do it through an interesting plot lens. You're going to have to do it in a way, or maybe just for me, it's like a part of the world I don't know about as much, or a group of people I don't understand as much about. Like something else has to pull me in other than there's thematic content. So I am the same reader, but depending on the genre, depending on like how it's being sold, I'm gonna have like different reading tastes for each of those things. Another thing can be book length. I love a chunky fantasy. A romance, I'm not going to want super long. Most of the time, I want my horror to be like under 250 pages. So that's another thing where sometimes you want that ton of detail in a genre, and sometimes like that longer book may start to drag for you. Okay, so like, how do you explore this? So one of the ways that I've done it is by doing like challenges, and they're kind of like personal challenges. So I had this notion, like I love fantasy and I like romance on occasion. And so I'm like, I should like romantasy, like, but it never really called to me. So I did a video where I read a bunch of romantasy, and I made a determination that it wasn't for me through that video and through kind of like challenging myself to read that subgenre to see if it worked for me. I like sometimes it goes past genres. So I did another one where I didn't really think I liked vampire novels because every kind of experience I had with them I felt very so about. So then I read a bunch of books across a wide range of genres with vampires in them, and I kind of figured out what kind of vampire book specifically works for me. And since then, I did that about a year ago. Since then, I've picked up multiple vampire books based off of that ended up being really enjoyable experiences for me. So this is really about challenging your reading assumptions, and maybe you didn't like something. Like for me, I didn't really think I enjoyed YA after that whole experience, being so influenced to pick up YA books. But it was really like I didn't enjoy the YA that I was picking up. Since then, I've read multiple YA books that I quite enjoyed. I liked ones that had darker themes. I like ones that have nostalgia. And I think that I would have never read those books or found those books I enjoyed in that category had I not challenged myself beyond that original notion that I developed. So that I think that if you don't have like the immediate notion of how to read reflectively, or maybe don't do it now. One of the ways that I feel is a good way to become a more reflective reader is by doing group reads or buddy reads. So for me personally, I'm really always gonna read a little bit more deeply, I tend to take more notes on a book when I'm reading it to discuss with someone as opposed to reading it individually, because I want to remember the topics that I want to chat through with the person I'm buddy reading with. And it really makes me force myself to articulate why I do or I don't like something, because I think that it makes for a much more interesting buddy reading experience, especially when you're on opposite ends of the spectrum and one person's enjoying it a lot and one person isn't, and you guys are both able to kind of explain the rationale or the reasons behind why. It forces you to kind of think about it, but then for yourself, but then it also forces you to kind of think about why someone might be enjoying something that you're not liking, and what about the experience of you guys both reading the same exact book is different for you. I think that getting that perspective is really helpful in becoming a more reflective reader. So I spent some time talking about how to pick up the right book for yourself, but I think maybe not equally important, but important aspect is knowing when to put a book down, knowing when to DNF a book and make the decision that you are not going to finish it. So DNFing is a curated art for myself. I have been DNFing books for many years, but when I got back into reading after college, I had been abandoning books all the time. I wouldn't even call it I was not finishing them in a passive way. And I became a completionist. I was I want to finish the books I started. And I think that a lot of people talk about how that could lead to reading slumps, and that could just lead to less enjoyable reading. You're just you're finishing something that isn't bringing you joy. And I think that it makes your hobby, at least for me, I don't enjoy hate reading. I do it sometimes, but it's pretty rare. And it makes your hobby less enjoyable. So really learning how to do this, and I think that maybe some of us want to finish the book because we're completionists and all of that, but also because we fear that we're making the wrong decision. So I want to talk about how you can learn that to trust your gut and to make the decision to DNF a book that is not working for you. Okay, so the first step I did was that I started taking note of when I was considering DNFing a book. And I would continue to persevere, but I would have it in my mind that I wanted to DNF it. Usually, it's not just one thing for me. There's a combination of things that are happening. The character voice is off, the dialogue might be stilted, maybe I'm reading a book and it's not matching the marketing that was around it, so it's not really the book that I was anticipating. Maybe I'm just not able to get through the sentence by sentence flow. But generally speaking, it's just a bunch of little things that are a little off. So then once I start to identify that there's a lot of little things that are off, I go to Goodreads, Storygraph, whatever you use, and I look at the 3-star reviews. Those ones, to me, are the most honest, and I most neutral. If I see multiple reviews that kind of hit on the things that were irking me, and then they say that those are consistent throughout the book, that's a good sign that I shouldn't keep going. But for a long time I did, and I would persevere. And after a while of doing that, I would realize that a lot of my original critiques and the things that I saw in the reviews were valid. And I felt the same exact way at the end of the book. And while I didn't hate the book a lot of the time, I felt neutrally about it. I started to question, why am I reading so many books I feel neutrally about when I know there's so many other books out there that I would like or love? So now I call it quits because I am trusting my gut and I don't feel like I'm missing out on something, because so many times when I put this to the test, I ended up being right about my original judgment. And I'm not saying at like the 3-page mark. I'm saying I'm getting like 15, 20, sometimes farther % of the way into a book. And there have been times where I've done that and I've kept going. So I think a really good example is this series, The Faithful and the Fallen. I almost DNF'd the first book at the 50% mark. I ended up watching multiple videos about it and deciding to trek on, and ended up really loving the series. So I think another thing about your reading taste is being open to change. You're not always going to be the same person, so you're not always going to be the same reader. And sometimes in the past, a type of genre or something may not have worked for you, and maybe in this phase of your life, you would enjoy it. So I think that it's also important to keep challenging your notions and not get stuck in the type of reader you think you are. But then I talked about de-influencing. So what do I mean by that? So once you have your reading taste honed in on a little bit more, then you could be a lot more critical or have a better eye for the types of books that you hear someone talk about and have a good idea you'll also enjoy. So I watch and consume a lot of bookish content. I mean, I'm on the bookish internet, and sometimes I will hear people absolutely rave about a book. And I will trust their judgment on books, but I will still know that something about it doesn't sound like it's for me. And I'm just not going to pick it up. Whereas years ago, if I saw it in a used bookstore or I saw it at the library, I might have decided, you know what, it's $1. It's like, I could just grab it. I don't do that anymore because I trust my reading tastes, and unless there's something about it that still pulls me in, or like their critiques are not deal breakers for me, I'm gonna decide to pick it up or to put it down. Like, that's gonna be a me decision. And so I guess like this was mainly about your reading taste, but I think that it's so easy to get caught up in bookish hype. It's so easy to want to read books that you see people that are really passionate about and think like, I'm going to be this passionate about it too. But you can de-influence yourself and be influenced by the right sort of things that are going to be more up your alley. But I think that's all I have for this video. I wanted to make it a little bit more chatty. Yeah, I think that's all I have. So until next time, happy reading.